Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz saxophonist Ron Aprea. He grew up in Astoria, New York, got his own alto sax at the age of 16, and started taking lessons in a studio across the street from Radio City Music Hall. Being so close to New York, he got some of the best education in the world going at the famed Birdland, seeing the likes of Count Basie and Blakey's Jazz Messengers. His latest 2015 CD pays tribute to John Lennon and the Beatles, and it's an ode to spending some time in the studio years ago with his friend, John Lennon. He's jammed with legends like Woody Herman, Tito Puente, Billy May, Skitch Henderson, and Lionel Hampton, and he has stories to back all of it up. So please dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you for taking some time to talk with me. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, good. I'm happy to do it.
I'm just going to start off here real quick and ask you, what has been going on with you lately?
She was doing a lot of writing. I'm working. I actually have a big band that I put back together about 3 years ago, and I've been doing a steady gig every on the last Sunday of each month at a jazz club up here called Trumpets. It's in Montclair, New Jersey, and so I've been spending a lot of time writing and performing with that band, and of course that's led to some other venues, and so I've been kind of busy with the big band lately. And my wife's a jazz singer, Angela De Niro, and we perform regularly with a small group, rhythm section, and myself and her. And she also sings with the big band as well. So we're doing a little bit of each, and not as much freelancing as I used to do, but occasionally I'll pick up a gig and do some freelancing as well, and so will Angela. But for the most part, we have our own set thing, and we've been fortunately busy, playing with both bands and getting ready actually to put another album together for Angela. It's been a few years since she's recorded, so we have some new material, and we'll be back in the studio shortly.
Wonderful. So talk to me about this album, the tribute to John Lennon and the Beatles. How did this come about, and how do you feel about it?
I put my heart and soul into that project. It came about, I worked with John Lennon back in 1974. I did an album with John called Walls and Bridges, and I spent about 3 intense weeks with John up at the record plant doing this thing, and became quite friendly with John, and I loved working with him. He's a sweetheart to work with. It was a new kind of a new venture for me, being a jazz player. It was a genre that I wasn't as comfortable with as I would have liked to, but there were 5 horns, me and 4 other horn players, and we put out this amazing album for John, and he did well with it. And I've been thinking about doing a Lennon tribute since then. This is 1974, so it took me a little while to put it together. But a few things happened that kind of inspired me to go ahead and start working on it.
So talk to me about your life growing up in Astoria, New York. How did you get involved in jazz and music?
Well, I really, I've been asked that question a few times, and I hesitate because it's hard to. It's been a while, and I think probably the area of Astoria where I grew up had a lot to do with it. My house, the house I was living in, was about 25 or 30 feet from this Baptist church. It's kind of an integrated neighborhood. And I was kind of raised on listening to gospel music, especially in the warm weather. In the summer times, I remember my window would be open and air windows would be open, and this gospel music would be coming right into my house every Sunday, all day long. And I think that probably had a lot to do with steering me in that direction, jazz. Strangely, the first solo album that I ever did, or the first solo recorded performance that ever did, happened to be a gospel album as well. A gal named Jessie Watson Burns, and I was featured on that album. So I've had roots in the gospel thing, and I think that probably was I would get goosebumps listening to that gospel choir every Sunday, and I think that probably had a lot to do with it. I think some of it you're born with, and I think certain things trigger it, and I think that might have done it. And my mother was also fine singer, and she would be singing all day long, doing her housework and singing along with her records, and she'd be listening to Sinatra and Jimmy Roselli and singing along. So I was, kind of surrounded with music, from as far back as I can remember. But the jazz influence, I think, probably started with the gospel thing, and then I remember as a kid listening to Pete Fountain and really enjoying his clarinet playing. And of course that led me to Benny Goodman, who was another great clarinet player, and of course that led me to the big bands, because Benny Goodman always had a big band, or most of the time he did anyway. And of course then that led me into the direction of Duke Ellington and Basie and Woody Herman. So it was, things just evolved that way, I guess.
Yeah. So was it always music that was going to be in your future, or did you have other dreams growing up?
I liked baseball. I was a pretty good baseball player. I toyed with the idea of being a professional player at one point. That didn't work out, and it was running parallel with the music. And music was always there, but there were other interests as well. And baseball was one. I also loved carpentry, and I was always building things. But I think the music thing probably just outlasted everything else, and just became I can't even explain why. I guess as you improve as a musician, and you're playing with better bands and better situations, and things start evolving, you start feeling good about your musical achievements. That maybe has something to do with it. I don't know, but there's a point where you just want to play music, and everything else kind of takes a back seat. And that happened to me probably in my late teens.
So talking about your teens, you get an alto sax at 16. You start taking lessons across from Radio City Music Hall. That had to be a pretty bespectacled kind of thing to go to.
Well, I think I was probably by the time I took those lessons, that was my first teacher, a guy named Ted Grant, who was doing the shows at Radio City, and he had a studio right across the street, which I started. He was my first private teacher, and that had a big influence on me. And he was big on tone, and he spent a lot of time with me on developing a real nice sound for the alto saxophone. And then I went on to study with teachers after him. He was not a jazz teacher, and I was kind of leaning toward the jazz things. And I also decided to get into my doubles, which was flute and clarinet, but I studied with a great teacher named Bob Tricarico, who had just gotten off the road with Ray Anthony's band and Louis Prama's band. He was a great teacher and a great player. And but Bobby was one of these guys that played his doubles real well, and he had made his way into the New York studio scene, and he was pushing me into that direction as well. So I started studying flute and clarinet with him, and later with Harold Bennett and some other classical teachers for the doubles. Probably in the early '80s, I gave Phil Woods a call. I was reading the liner notes on one of his albums, and there was some stuff in there that really intrigued me. And I gotta pick his brain on this. So I called him up. He had just gotten back from Europe. He was living in France for about 10 years, and he was living in the Poconos. And I would drive up to the Poconos and pick his brain, and he showed me some really interesting and amazing things. So I was always fortunate to have good teachers from Ted Grant to Tricarico to Phil Woods to Harold Bennett and Frank Foster later. So that really helped shape what I'm doing now.
Well, and early influences that shaped you. You were fortunate to see some cool acts at the Birdland Jazz Club. You saw Count Basie and Blakey's Jazz Messengers. That had to be a big thing for you to see at that time in your life.
Yeah, I was kind of raised at I spent a lot of years in Birdland. I lived in Astoria, which is the stone's throw away, and I used to run into the city all the time. And Birdland was my favorite club. There was something about the acoustics in there, and you could sit in the gallery and spend the whole night there and have a beer. So it was kind of cool. And I got to see all the great bands. The Basie band was my favorite, big band, of course. And his band would come in there and spend about a month in there around the holiday season, and I would be there just about every night, which is where I met Frank Foster. Frank was arranging and playing with that band in those days. and Frank and I became friends. In fact, it was funny how I became friends with Frank. They had a photographer, this chick photographer that would come around and ask you for to take a picture for a fee, I guess $4 or $5, whatever it was. And so one of the guys I was with suggested that maybe she can get Frank Foster to come over and take a picture with us. He was already an international star, and we were just kids. And she leaves, and I figure that's the end of that. And after the set, she comes walking back with Frank Foster, and Frank sits down at the table, and she takes the picture, and then we started chatting, and I became a lifelong friend with Frank Foster. That was my introduction to him, and I spent most of my career. Frank was part of almost everything I ever did after that. It was pretty amazing. When he left the Basie band, I played with his band, and I would just go over his house, and we'd play duets, and we'd exchange ideas, and he would lay all his scores on me, all his music, and it was kind of a I don't know, my guardian angel, I think.
Yeah. A lot of those old cats always have good things and leave behind really good things. Is there any advice that he gave you that really resonates still with you?
Frank gave me so much advice. I remember my first tour with Lionel Hampton's band was in 1969, and Frank spent about an hour on the phone with me, telling me all the do's and don'ts of the road, because he had been on the road for so many years. And he shared all his road stories with me, and gave me a lot of really good advice that helped me with the grind of being on the road.
So you played with so many people too. Woody Herman, Tito Puente, Lionel Hampton. What did you learn getting on the road? What was the level of professionalism that you kind of soaked from them, and how they approached the bandstand?
Well, they all had the same thing in common, whether it be Woody or Hamp or Tito. When they got on the bandstand, they were up there, ready to go every night. You never hear them. I never heard any of those guys really have a bad night. I mean, they're very consistent. They're very. I think that's probably the word, consistency. I mean, they all had that in common, where they would just they would light up. We'd be on the bus sometimes for a day, a day and a half, and you get off the bus and everybody's tired, everybody's looking to crash, and find a room somewhere and go to sleep, and Hamp say, "Okay, we're gonna have rehearsal, guys," and we'd be, get off the bus and we'd be having a rehearsal before the gig. He was very audience conscious, and Woody was kind of the same way, They were guys that they strove for perfection all the time, and that, I guess, that's one of the things that I learned from these masters.
So over your career, you write, you arrange, you perform, you've been around for a long time. What has been the key to your longevity? You still obviously have a very deep passion for making and composing. What's been your secret, or what's just been your method?
You know what? I think the key to longevity is just your love for what you're doing. That's the big motivator for me. I mean, I get excited, as excited today hearing good music as I did the very first time I heard a band. For me, that's the motivating force behind everything. It's the music itself. The accomplishments; those are all good things. They come with with the deal. But for me, it's always the music, and whether I'm sitting here writing a new arrangements, which I'm still constantly writing new material and exploring old things and fixing things and making things work and creating new musical situations. That, for me, that's the thing that motivates me. Playing gigs is fun, and it's always nice to be up on a bandstand and turning on an audience too. But for me, it's the music and it's the musicians. It's the camaraderie, and it's the whole lifestyle. I don't. It's just something that you don't get tired of. It's evolving all the time, and it's a constant challenge. There's new challenges all the time.
I think most of us are only as good as those that we look up to. So I want to know, who were your jazz heroes? You played with a lot of what the world would consider heroes, but for you personally, as a player and a human being, who has moved you the most? Well,
I never had one person who was my idol. I loved so many people. Charlie Mariano. I went through a phase where I couldn't stop listening to his stuff. I loved, of course, Charlie Parker and Eric Dolphy. Later, I fell in love with Eric Dolphy's. During the 60s, music started changing, and there was a lot of modal style, high energy playing going on. And Eric Dolphy, Coltrane. I went through a whole period, a 10-year period of being buried in Coltrane's music. Now I'm back closer to bebop. We're back inside, most of us, and so Phil Woods I loved and respected, and became good friends with Phil as well. So those guys. Sonny Stitt, I still love listening to his music. Getz was a great player. I loved listening to Getz, of course, Dizzy and Miles, and those are the people I spent most of my time. Monk, those are people I listened to and growing up.
Well, let me ask you that. You saw a lot of shows at Birdland, and probably in the entire world, there's probably no better place, or one of the top places would be Birdland. But let me ask you this: if you could go back in time and kind of go into that fantasy realm and see somebody that you never got to see live, who would you have wanted to have caught live?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. I think maybe Louis Armstrong. Although I did play with Louis one night when he was retired, kind of toward the end of his career. When I was with Ham's band, he sat in with us one night and we did Hello Dolly. So it was the only time I ever played with Louis Armstrong. So I think probably I would like to have seen some Louis when he was in his prime.
Yeah, that would have been rich. This is a general question. You've dedicated your life to the jazz craft. So let me ask you this: why do you love jazz?
Well, it's a great vehicle for expression, for being creative. I find it challenging and satisfying in just about every way. It just makes the most sense to me. Not that I'm insensitive to other genres. There are many other genres that I love. My son happens to be a very fine classical violinist, and so I have an appreciation for classical music as well. It's really hard to say. It just always hit me right from the first time I heard Pete Fountain improvising on the clarinet. I said, that's what I want to do, and who the heck knows why?
Let me ask you this about fans. You've played for so many fans. Many fans have heard your music on albums. But let me ask you this: is there a fan compliment or something special someone said to you that you really remember?
Well, gee whiz. That's again. I'm gonna have to think about that. I guess. You appreciate all the compliments. It's always a good thing to hear positive things about what you're doing, because most of the times we're never really sure, and I speak for many of us, and if not all of us, we're never 100% sure what we're doing. Is anybody going to like it? You're playing stuff that you're creating a lot of times on the spot, and is anybody but me going to like this? And it's kind of the same thing when you put out an album. I get these ideas for these productions, and I sit down, I write those arrangements, and I do what I have to do to get it to where I want it to be. And then when it's done, you always have that fear. Will anybody like this? So when you do get a review, I think probably the compliment that I appreciated the most was a review that I got in Downbeat for this last album that I did. I was a little bit worried that because I used the string section, and we all know what happened to Charlie Parker and Cannonball and Getz when they used strings. They get a lot of critics pan them. So I was a little bit concerned about that. Not enough to stop me, because this is what I was hearing. So I went and wrote for a string section. So when the review in Downbeat came out, that was like, holy smokes, I couldn't believe it. I got a 4-star review. And that, I think, might be, for me, maybe the best compliment I've ever got as an artist.
Right on. So, I have an encyclopedia of jazz names. It's quite thick, and I can go through and just catch up on people, discover new artists from way back in the day. When the world comes across your name, when your name is in the book, and when they look back on your career, how do you want the world to remember what you've done for jazz?
Well, I want it to be remembered in a positive light. Of course, doesn't everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, with people like Charlie Parker and Eric Dolphy and so many other people that I mentioned, some of these absolute geniuses on their instruments. Not too many people are going to be on that level where they were. So I don't expect that. But I would like to be remembered as somebody who made a contribution and created created some music that some people benefited from, and maybe added something different, whether it be through my arrangements or certain bands that I put together and certain performances, that something positive happened to them from my music. That would be the way. And I'd like to remember this. And I think we all. I remember when they asked Miles what inspired him to play. He said what inspired him to play was that he wanted to be on the bandstand alongside Charlie Parker. He wanted to be a peer of Charlie Parker, and I think that's pretty much what we all want. And I hope that answers your question.
It does, for sure. And I have one more for you. Everyone has a version of who you are: your family, your friends, your fans, business associates. But tell me who you think you are. When you wake up, you face the day, you have a perception of who you are. Who are you?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I wake up in the morning is my wife and my family. That would have to be right on top of the list. Right beneath that is what can I do today, musically? That's gonna what can I do new? In fact, before I got on the phone with you, I'm sitting here writing out a solo for one of my students. I only have a few students now. I don't teach like I used to have a gang of private students, but I'm down to about 2 students now. And I have one kid who's a really talented young man, and he's taking his jazz NISMA. It's like a state test through the school systems. And he's learning how to improvise, and I'm sitting here writing him a solo on I've Got Rhythm Changes, So so this is what I do. This is, I get up in the morning, and if it's not that, it'll be I have my recording studio in my house, and I'll be putting a project together to record or writing music or writing some arrangements for my wife. But it's all about music. At this stage of my life, that's it. It's my family and music, and it's nice to be able to focus on just 2 things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great, man. Ron, thank you for opening up. Thank you for your time, and most certainly thank you for all of the music that you've given us.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate sitting here chatting with you, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Ron for his time and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, or for all things Neon Jazz, the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.